Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to some all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode we're heading back to the world of Season 6 of Ranked, and we're featuring another gameplay in our analysis trilogy. We're once again on the domination version of the map Northern Lights, like the first match, link available in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now, and of course we're in the Tier 7 American cruiser known as the Pensacola. Now we're going to be building on the principle of our first gameplay, which was being the bait and using the Pensacola's squishy reputation in order to draw out enemy fire and draw the enemy's attention. But we're also going to be adding on two other principles here. The first is an overall one which I found that as I went up the ranks, and for reference this is one of my final games in the first league, whereby I'm rank 6 at this point and I've only got 3 more wins to go before I can get to rank 5 and into the Premier League. The first trait, which boded me well in the later ranks and particularly in the Premier League, was the constant sense of positivity I tried to surround myself with. Whereby no matter how hard things got, I always tried to stay positive and try to see things in a good light. So that way, if the game started off badly, I didn't think badly of my teammates, I didn't think badly of my overall performance, but instead I said to myself, I'm not going to give up until my dying breath. At which point, a number of times, games which many would write off as being a loss, ended up being very closer losses, alternatively surprising wins. But the second trait, which we'll come to later as well, is being able to essentially space out the opposition, whereby trying to understand where the enemy team's positioned and, as a result, the relationships enemy team members can have with one another. But what is the opening gambit then? Well, our team is doing exactly in a way what happened with the enemy team in our first ranked analysis, whereby we started off on the southern side of the map this time, and our team's making a directed push towards the landmass between Alpha and Bravo. Sheltering there, and our destroyer, the Leningrad, will eventually push into Alpha alongside our Belfast and what will also be our Fiji. In the meantime, our Miyoko is going to gradually make their way in a defensive manner towards Bravo, and that means that myself and our two battleships, our Nagato and our Gneisenau, are going to make our way out towards the southwest side of Alpha. From my perspective, the point of me doing this is so I can provide some long-range harassment against the enemy battleships if they do get caught out as they transition towards Alpha or towards Bravo, and as our Leningrad, by looks of things, or alternatively while our cruisers were there, fighter aircraft spots the enemy Colorado and Nagato, we're going to be applying that principle straight away and opening up on the Colorado. Our logic also being that whilst we are squishy, we've got the rudder shift and the speed in order to avoid the Colorado's fearsome 406mm armour piercing shells. Now our team is going to get the early lead. We are capturing Alpha, and the intelligence gathered by our teammates reveals that the enemy team is actually going towards Bravo. It's rather interesting because going towards Bravo means that whilst you sacrifice a significant points disadvantage at the start of the match, unless you have all your destroyers speed boost toward Bravo, it does put you actually in a very strong position later on, because Bravo is the more enclosed of the objectives. There's only really one way in and one way out unless you go all the way down the 10 line, but that in itself takes a lot of time up, so you need a fast destroyer for that. But as we return fire on the Colorado here, we dodged most of their shells, albeit apart from one. And that shell scores a citadel. It's unfortunate, and it means we're now down to 2/3 of our health right at the start of a game. We're only 3 minutes in. But we're going to carry on the fire. We're not going to be put off by the fact that we've lost some health. We need to stay confident, and we want to cause a fire on that Colorado. And our 16% fire chance says yes. And now with that Colorado on fire, that's going to bleed out a good amount of health, because it's very unlikely they will just waste their consumables for one fire. It just gives us a little bit more strength and something to think about. Right, the Colorado's starting to bleed some health, we're getting some damage on the board. Perhaps now we can start to be aggressive and push down the western side of Alpha and get into a northwestern position. And we send up our fighter plane at this point by the logic that if anything did decide for any reason to hide itself on the northwestern corner of Alpha, our plane's going to see it first. It's just a safeguard essentially, no guarantees in terms of actually seeing anything. But very quickly we have to change tact rather than pushing down the way of Alpha, because we notice the enemy team gets Bravo and the enemy team's distribution is such that they are going to be pushing through Bravo. So here I say to our Gneisenau, look, we need to turn back, because if you look on the minimap, our team is severely out of position. We have a Miyoko who's beached themselves unfortunately on the small landmass at Gulf 7. Our Nagato is making their way down towards the Miyoko to support them and to try and create a defensive line on Bravo. But the sheer mass of enemy ships going through Bravo, that's going to be very difficult to do. And unfortunately, on the other side of the coin, when we look at our ships who are pushing through Alpha, our Leningrad has pushed significantly far forward to the point where they've actually left our Belfast and Fiji behind, or at least for the time being. Which means our Leningrad, whilst they're providing intel, is out of position in relation to the rest of our fleet. But at the moment, when we're talking about position and understanding the relationships between teammates, the enemy team is in a very good spot. They're clustered together but not too tightly, and it means they're all covering one another, and they're securing Bravo, they're making sure they've got a foothold on that objective as they rip apart the Miyoko that has been cut off from our main fleet, and there they go, as we can see. So now you may be thinking at this point, well, as your team goes one ship down, that's got to have a negative impact on the thought process. It does, and as I say, I found that in Premier League matches, being the team that loses the first ship, unless an enemy ship gets knocked out very quickly afterwards, has a massive impact on some people to the point where they switch from a mindset of I want to win the game with my team to a case of I just want to get as much XP for myself, screw the team. Now I'm not saying we can generalise that to everyone, but that's just something I noticed in a good number of individuals. But we're staying away from that, and we're thinking, how can we build ourselves into our teammates? Well, we need to, in a way, get alongside, if not in front of our Nagato, and that's what we're doing right now. We need to be detected so that way our friendly battleship can do a lot of damage without being shot back at, because they only have a finite number of resources, i.e. heals, damage repair, consumables, fire extinguishers, things along those lines. So we open fire on the Colorado once again, and it would have to be that opponent, of course. And we're going to throw in some more high explosive. We want to set another fire and bleed out as much health as possible. And our high explosive does a brilliant job even on ships that are quite damaged, as we're seeing here. That was 3 grand off and a fire set. We dump in another salvo as the Colorado returns fire. But in all matches you're going to have to ride out some luck, and as we can see here we get lucky in the fact that we turn with our aft completely towards the Colorado and absorb 10,000 damage in terms of penetrations for armour piercing, but no citadels. Luck was on our side that time compared to the first time we got here. And now down to our last third of health, we're still going to stay here for as long as possible to buy our teammates the time they need. The Nagato to pull further back, and hopefully for our knives now to get involved a little bit more. So we open fire once again on the Colorado. They've put their fires out, but as we're going to see, we score another fire, and this is going to stick. It's brilliant, it bleeds out a lot more of their HP. As we dodge their return fire, and the enemy Nagato and shores seem to be aiming at us as well. This has worked very well, we've been able to bait the enemy fire away from our teammates. But as we pull further and further back, the Colorado ends up on the fringe of our range at this point, leaving our range circle. We decide to stop shooting. As we knock off another significant chunk, 3 grand HP from the Colorado, and the fire that's on them is going to cause them to bleed to within an inch of death. Unfortunately, we're not going to catch them out with an Arsonist award, because just as they're about to burn to death, they trigger a heal. So now with this having occurred, something has occurred to me at this point. Where's the enemy destroyer, the Mayhan? We haven't seen it for the majority, if not a single portion of the game. Well, logic would dictate that if it has come through Bravo, it's probably going to go for an isolated battleship with its 9.2 km torpedoes and its 7.7 km concealment with camouflage, if I remember correctly. Or roughly around that, that's without concealment expert. And sure enough, the Mayhan is right in the position that I thought it would be, i.e. south of the rest of its team, trying to harass our Nagato. And the problem is at this point, I'm too far back to actually punish the Mayhan's positioning and at the same time help out our friendly battleship. And as you can see, they're being torpedoed quite heavily, and I can't get close enough yet in order to provide the hydroacoustic search our battleship needs to survive. So this is a key failing on my part here, that I haven't got close enough to our Nagato. And part of that is because I was more focused earlier on the self-plate of trying to bait enemy fire away. You can't have it both ways. But we're going to head towards our ally, and I've told the Nagato where possible I will try and push the smoke screen in order to try and get the Mayhan to pull back, or alternatively turn their attention towards me rather than our allied battleship. And I throw out my hydro here early, so that way I don't have to think about it later on as we get closer and closer to our friendly battleship, but also just in case the Mayhan decides to torpedo towards me instead of my friendly battleship. It's not likely it's going to happen, but you take the precautions. We keep getting closer and closer, and also noting that the distribution of the enemy team is such that if any more torpedoes come in, they're going to be completely out of range in terms of reaching myself and the Nagato. So we're using our hydro purely as a counter towards the Mayhan. And here we do catch the torpedoes a little bit earlier, and I believe that helps our Nagato avoid the entire barrage there. And we continue to get close to our ally, and we open fire some armour piercing on an exposed broadside of the enemy Belfast. In the meantime, what's going on as we pick up a 7k salvo on this Belfast in terms of the rest of our team? Well, our teammates are pushing around northwest of Bravo. They've gradually started to do so, and our Nagato has cleaned off the shores. Unfortunately, the Mayhan is going to score two torpedo strikes here, and that is going to really hamper our Nagato's survivability to the point where they will be out of the game now. The enemy Mayhan has pulled behind the smoke once again, having drifted out of it. They've played very well, and now it's going to be a case of us being by ourselves as our Nagato's on its last legs. They have stopped the flooding, but the Belfast is going to make the difference here by the looks of things. As they disappear behind a smoke screen, and we try to get some more long-range armour piercing into them. Noticing the Mayhan as well, and we're also taking fire from the other Belfast enemy team making its way towards Alpha. And we can also see here how our Knights now decide to pull back through Alpha, which has lured one of the Belfast, indeed the enemy Nagato, to head that way somewhat. But we're now the centre of the attention because our friendly Nagato has died. So here's how we're going to break up the relationships between the enemy team. Notice that the Belfast is heading after us. Now we're fast, we're able to hold a decent amount of speed. Currently 27 knots, we can get it back up to say 30 knots if we travel in a straight line for a short period of time. The philosophy behind doing this is that we're trying to pull the Belfast away from the rest of its teammates because we haven't got that much health, and surely if we're a squishy ship you can just throw armour piercing at us and we're going to fall apart. Well, with our manoeuvrability in terms of our 5.6 second rudder shift, that's not going to be the case, and it's quite the opposite. We're going to carry on dumping in the rounds to this Belfast and make them pay for their insubordination and their outright aggression. As the Belfast gradually starts to turn slightly broadside here, we're going to hopefully finish them off with this high explosive salvo, although that's wishful thinking. Almost, and the Mayhan's also opening fire on us. But note here how the Mayhan is out of position from the rest of their team. The Mayhan right now could have done one of two things. It could have either really pushed us when the Belfast started to push us in order to provide a 2 versus 1 scenario, as we hit the Belfast in their smoke, and we've got a rough idea of where they're going to be, having beached themselves temporarily on our friendly Nagato's wreck. We've thrown another salvo here. Hopefully that's going to hit. Bingo, that's one Belfast gone. But note how the Mayhan could have retreated back towards the objective, but instead they stayed with their friendly Belfast. And what this means is for a short period of time, despite the fact they're quite fast compared to us, that they're out of the game as well because they're pursuing a cruiser which they'd have to really just keep grinding down over a long period of time, but they're not supporting their teammates. And I type in here I've got the Mayhan chasing me to let our friendly Fiji up at Bravo. No, look, you've probably got a chance to capture the objective because the Mayhan was coming after me. And this is where we also come on to the point that when we look over towards Alpha, the Nagato has been spotted, and so has the remaining Belfast and the enemy team. They are clumped together, and their logic is going to be they're going after the Nizer now. So they're that little cluster of teamwork, meanwhile the Mayhan's by itself. And whilst it's very likely, as our Nizer now falls to the enemy Nagato, that the Mayhan is actually headed back towards Bravo, we now need to think about how can we get back into a relationship with our friendly Fiji. And the logic's simple. We're going to need to pull the attention of the two ships on Alpha once they finish capturing it, because we won't be able to interrupt. We haven't got the speed or range to do so. But we need to get between those ships and the Mayhan, because if all three link up and work together, it's going to be a 3 versus 2 scenario, and we can't outright win that because we're in a fragile cruiser. Our Fiji is a fragile British light cruiser, and unless we have the play of the year, it's not going to work. So instead, we're going to get between the enemy team, make sure they can't link up. The Fiji will be able to tear apart the Mayhan very easily once it's been spotted. And on the other side of the coin, we won't be able to tear apart the Nagato by ourselves easily, although we can set them on fire. But definitely if the Belfast, much like its other Belfast in the enemy team, becomes over-aggressive and puts itself out of position, even for a short while giving us a broadside, we can rip them apart and turn this very quickly into a 2 versus 1 for our team. Well, that's the logic at least, and that's exactly what I'm thinking. So as we've been detected, I decide, why not go broadside for a bit, see if I can get the enemy Nagato to fire at me. Because if I do, it tells me exactly where it is. Although it looks as though the enemy Belfast has taken the shot. Alternatively, they've just come too close and they're actually shooting at our Fiji. But by sailing broadside to the two aggressors from Alpha, we want them to shoot at us as much as possible. Nice big shiny broadside, go for it. It looks as though the Mayhan is the ship that's spotting us, and as we start to open fire on the Belfast as they get closer and closer, we now, by the looks of things, do have their attention as priority target goes to 2. And the Mayhan has switched off of us. As we set the Belfast on fire, we switch to armour piercing, and straight away they've turned full broadside, and you know what that means? You guessed it. Another Belfast bites the dust. So now it's 2 versus 2. But again, note how the Nagato is so far away from its Mayhan. The Mayhan is roughly somewhere, well in fact it's just appeared on the minimap, it's literally on the edge of Grid Square, what would end up being essentially Foxtrot 6. They're out of position, so they've had to go to smoke in order to defend themselves. They're not supporting their friendly Nagato in doing so, because we're providing the spotting out here on the fringes for our Fiji to know where the Nagato is and when they're going to shoot. So we're actually harmonised with our teammate here. Meanwhile, the enemy team are not as harmonised as in the earlier scenarios of this match. So now, what can we do? Well, our team's got the points advantage because we've held the enemy team, we've taken the initial points advantage and making sure we haven't bled any more ships. And we've always had one objective in hand alongside the enemy team. We just need to close a little bit of distance now and be prepared for the worst case scenario that either we or our Fiji fall to other enemy ships. We set a fire on the Nagato. It's not going to continuously burn. They've put it out, but that means they've lost their fire extinguisher. And things are looking very positive because all we've got to do is either eliminate one of these 2 foes, and the Fiji can take care of the Mayhan. We don't need to worry about that. And the Fiji's respotted them, so that's perfect. We're just going to focus on burning that Nagato because if we lose our Fiji, we're still at enough range to cause considerable damage to that Nagato and burn them to death. As we set one fire, we'll go for another. Our Fiji has clocked onto the Mayhan and instantly starts shooting at them. We've got our targets, we just need to do our job as we pick up a high caliber achievement. We set a second fire, which pretty much guarantees now a couple more salvos and continuous fire burn. That Nagato's out of the game so long as we dodge return fire. And our Fiji does the job that's required. Takes out the Mayhan. We've won this now, regardless. As the Nagato misses the Fiji, as we dump in another high explosive salvo, taking off another 3,250 damage. We open up with one final salvo, and the game's ours. Time to take a look at the post-game stats. So quite a close one in the end, but we pulled through and added another star on our way to rank 5, and we can see that for our victory we did pick up the achievement of a high caliber, damage at least 4 enemy ships, where the damage caused must exceed 30% of the total HP of all the ships in the enemy team, and our battle performance was made up of 98,412 damage, including 1 citadel hit, 109 target hits for our main battery, 1 incapacitation, 2 enemy ships destroyed, and 8 fires set. Looking at the team scores, we can see that in terms of base experience, we picked up 1,817, putting us in first place by comparison to the rest of our team. Now, we did not carry our team, I should stress that straight away. We just contributed as much as we possibly could to effectively what was the defence of the enemy's push through Bravo, which led to the enemy team in a way stalemating as they tried to creep south of Bravo but were diverted southwest of the objective towards Alpha. In the meantime, our Fiji, who placed second and did a brilliant job in the end, they came through, took Bravo from the north, and then assisted us at long distance in cutting down the rest of the enemy team's remaining ships. In the point in the end where we had 2 ships able to fire from 2 different directions on a single enemy battleship in the form of the Nagato. Looking at our detailed report, we have one key item to note here, and that is for each ship we hit out of the 4 ships we hit, we made sure to do as much damage as possible to them, either destroying them outright, alternatively causing them to bleed a ridiculous amount of health. With regards to the Colorado, for example, we knocked off 40,507 of their health, and the majority of this did come through when they made their way south of Bravo. We kept our eye on them and focused purely them to the point where they were practically within a sliver of death, and it put them out of the match for a period of time, whereby in the end they had to break off as we pulled out of range as well in order to heal up. And doing this enabled us to break down the relationship between the Colorado and the Nagato and Belfast, who made their way west towards Alpha, thereby minimising the overall effectiveness of the enemy team unit and causing them to be a series of individuals. And each time we can put a ship out of the game, of course, that is a significant difference. Rather than leaving a number of ships that are just wounded, we made sure to try and do as much damage and cripple the enemy team's power as a team as much as possible. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after deductions and additions, we walked away with 167,966 silver credits and 4,089 experience. In conclusion, hopefully you can take away 2 key points in this video. Firstly, the idea of staying positive and always trying to see the bigger picture rather than the picture about yourself when games go poorly. By the end of the first half of this game, we'd already lost 2/3 of our health, but it did not dissuade us from continuing in the fight and continuing to try and do our best for our teammates, rather than just for our own XP balance and trying to retain our star at the end of the match if it had been a loss. And this enabled us to move on to our second point. We're able to see how one can make and break the relationships between their own teammates and the relationships between the enemy team over the course of a game. But we formed a strong long distance relationship with our Fiji in the end, even though we didn't have to type anything in the chat, by simply being in a different location and able to fire at the same enemy ships as they were, alternatively a different portion of the enemy fleet, thereby splitting the enemy team's fire over long distances. And we also saw how by focus firing particular ships, we're able to force them to break away from the rest of their fleet and therefore become isolated and get cut to pieces, whilst the enemy team tried to press on without them. And the enemy team also pursued after our rather weakened ship and broke their relationships, in the form of the first Belfast we took out, as they went after us rather than supporting the rest of their teammates. And what started off as a very cohesive enemy push through Bravo ended up as a crumbled mess with only a single Nagato left to tell the story. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, as always, take care and fair seas.